When it comes to antagonist, I think that Jujutsu Kaisen takes a very different route than other very popular shonen manga. Take One Piece, Bleach, Naruto, or Dragon Ball for example. There are plenty of antagonists throughout the series. A lot of these antagonists in these series are in groups, and there's plenty of antagonists within these antagonist groups. But Jujutsu Kaisen, for example, has a very small antagonist cast. We know that we have the Disaster Curses, we have Kenjaku, Sukuna, and in Volume 0 we had Geto, and you could also say for Hidden Inventory we had Toji, but other than that, there aren't really villains in Jujutsu Kaisen. We know that we have about 5 main villains, and the rest of the cast that you could say maybe are villains are people like Arame or the Finger Bearers, but there aren't really a lot of villains in Jujutsu Kaisen. So for today's video, we're going to be singling out the 5 biggest villains in Jujutsu Kaisen and ranking them by strength from weakest to strongest. And also, I do want to say that if you're wondering why I don't have the entire Disaster Curses on here, I actually do have a video where I rank the entire Disaster Curse group in order from weakest to strongest. So if you want to see that video, I'll have it linked in the description. And for anybody wondering why I've selected these 5 characters to be ranked in today's video, this is because there is basically no other big antagonist in Jujutsu Kaisen. Mahito was supposed to be the big antagonist from about the beginning of the series, sort of to about chapters 138 when he died to Yuji during their fight. And so that was about half the series that Mahito was the big antagonist for Yuji Itadori. I shouldn't really have to explain why Kenjaku and Sukuna are on here. They're the antagonists of the entire series. Now, the reason that Toji is on here is because we have an entire arc where he basically beats Gojo and Geto near death. So we know that we have an entire arc dedicated to Toji being the main villain in Jujutsu Kaisen. And then we also have for Geto an entire movie in Volume 0 where he was supposed to be the main antagonist there. And Geto started a war against the Jujutsu Society. So these 5 characters have been the biggest villains for Jujutsu Kaisen. So now with that being said, let's start ranking them from weakest to strongest. So starting off first, in last place we have Mahito, and Mahito is by no means weak. I actually have an entire video dedicated to why if Mahito had been given enough time, I think he would have been as strong as Sukuna one day. But unfortunately we didn't get to see Mahito be that strong. We know that Mahito has one of the most broken curse techniques in Jujutsu Kaisen. You basically can't damage him unless you can see and perceive the soul. But the problem is, very few sorcerers can actually do that. We know that Yuji can because he is a vessel for Sukuna, so having 2 souls in his own body allowed Yuji to perceive the soul. But for about 99% of other sorcerers, they can't actually hurt Mahito in a fight. We saw even when Yuji and Todo were jumping Mahito, even though Todo landed a black flash and it sent Mahito flying backwards, Mahito said the attack didn't even faze him because the only way to hurt Mahito is to hurt his soul. Mahito's defensive capabilities are so broken that he even says that even if he's crushed to bits, he can just form right back because his soul hasn't been touched. And we also know that he is able to transform into basically any animal that he wants to. He can make his size bigger, grow wings or grow hooves to run faster, and even become as small as a rat in order to escape from somebody. But arguably the brokest part about Mahito's curse technique would be his offensive capabilities, because he can also basically one-tap any opponent as long as he gets his palm on their bodies so he can transfigure their souls. We know that once he transfigures an opponent's soul, there's nothing they can do about it. In the fan book, when talking about Mahito's curse technique, it says a technique that modifies the soul of the target through the touch of a hand. Since sorcerers are not used to protecting their own souls with cursed energy, the outcome of the fight has already been decided as soon as the technique user touches any ordinary sorcerer. And it says that since his technique boasts a deadly power, Mahito's fighting style is mainly based on finding an opening in the opponent's defense in order to touch them. He does this by transfigured humans who are modified with idle transfiguration. So all it's saying here is that the outcome of a fight is practically already determined if you fight against Mahito. This is because, like I said earlier, most people can't perceive the soul, and if you can't perceive the soul, you've basically lost to Mahito. The only way to defeat Mahito would be by using either something that can hit the soul itself, or by using domain amplification or a domain expansion. And the reason I'm saying that domain amplification and domain expansion would be able to hit Mahito is because we know that Mahito keeps the shape of his body together through the use of his curse technique Idol Transfiguration. But we know that while inside a domain expansion, your curse technique is neutralized. So if, for example, Mahito was trapped inside of a domain expansion and got his head cut off, he shouldn't be able to just reattach it back very easily with Idol Transfiguration, because his Idol Transfiguration technique should be neutralized for the moment. The best thing for Mahito to do in that scenario would be to open up a domain expansion of his own, which we do actually see him do in the fight against Todo and Yuji, and it is actually one of the most impressive feats that we saw Mahito do, because he was able to copy Gojo's 0.2 second domain expansion. We know that whenever you open up a domain, there are two steps to the process. You open up your domain expansion and then you activate the sure hit within the domain expansion. But Mahito was able to shorten those two steps into just one. So as his domain expansion was opening, he was already hitting you with Idol Transfiguration. Now, unfortunately for Mahito, he did die fairly early in the grand scheme of things. He did have an insane growth rate, and like I said earlier, I do have a video on why I think that if Mahito was given enough time, he would have been able to reach the level of Gojo and Sukuna, but sadly we never got to see him get that strong. So for right now and on this ranking, Mahito is in 5th place. And I just want to reiterate one more time that Mahito is not weak by any means. He is very strong. It's just that on this list, the other 4 people are just complete monsters. So that being said, let's get into I have at number 4, Suguru Geto. And if you're wondering why I have Geto below Toji, trust me, I'll explain when I get to the Toji part. We know that in terms of raw output, Geto is undoubtedly one of the strongest sorcerers we've ever seen, because we know that Geto has no limit to the amount of curses that he can absorb. In the fan book, it says that there's no limitation to the number of curse spears that can be absorbed, and Geto had over 4,000. And we also know that he had special grade curses at the same time, so he was able to tame special grade curses, make them a part of his arsenal, and then use them to fight. And during Volume 0, we see that for the most part, Geto was able to 1v2 and keep up, dodge, and react to both Rika and Yuta at the same time. We know that Geto has insane physical stats. He also has over 4,000 curses that he can use, and we even saw that Kenjaku said that if Geto had not split his forces whilst fighting Yuta, Geto actually would have beaten Yuta during their fight. Geto became so powerful with his curse technique that he was deemed the worst of all curse users. We also know that Geto was able to use RCT as he does it in his fight with Yuta, but there's one very important thing that we should quickly go over, because I actually think that what I'm about to bring up is a problem on Gege's part rather than Geto's part. And the reason I'm saying this is because Geto actually doesn't have a domain expansion as far as we know, but I think he does, and I'll explain why. You see, Volume 0 was actually written an entire year before Jujutsu Kaisen, the main story, was written. So there are a lot of things now in Jujutsu Kaisen that you won't find back then in Volume 0. And I also want to point out that if you look it up, it'll actually say that Volume 0 was published after the beginning of the main story of Jujutsu Kaisen. But if you go and look at the wiki, we actually see that Jujutsu Kaisen was titled Tokyo Metropolitan Curse Technical School, and that was actually published in April of 2017. So we know that Volume 0 was written all the way back in April 2017, then it was retitled to Jujutsu Kaisen Volume 0, and that was released in December of 2018. So back when JJK was just Tokyo Metropolitan Curse Technical School, there were some things that weren't exactly figured out back then. And now the reason I'm bringing all of this up is because I undoubtedly believe that if Geto was written now, he would have a domain expansion. There were no domain expansions in Volume 0, and it would just make absolutely no sense if Geto didn't have one, because every special grade sorcerer has a domain expansion, and even high level grade 1s have domain expansions as well. Think about this for a second. If all of the special grade sorcerers and all of the disaster curses, and even Megami has a domain expansion, it would most likely make sense that Geto would have a domain expansion. It's just that back then in Volume 0, Gege didn't even have domain expansions in the series, so he wasn't given one and we didn't get to see any domain expansions. So on top of everything I've already said about Geto's strength, it would also make sense if he had a domain expansion of his own, or at least some form of simple domain, because even people like Kusakabe and Miwa have simple domains. So even if you don't agree Geto would have a domain expansion, he undoubtedly would have some anti-domain technique. So with all of those abilities that we have, 4,000 curses that Geto had in Volume 0, plus his physical speed and attributes, Geto undoubtedly earns his right at number 4 on this list. And I do just want to say once again, being number 4 on this list is not an understatement to Geto's strength at all. I believe that even though Mahito's strong, these 4 sorcerers from Geto through Sukuna are absolute monsters of sorcerers. They are at the highest level of Jujutsu strength. Alright, so next up at number 3 we have Toji. And I told you I would explain why I would have Toji above Geto. And I actually thought that the placement between Toji and Geto would be so contentious that I ran a poll asking you guys who you thought was stronger between Volume 0 Geto and Toji. And when I put up the poll, I actually thought that I would come back to the poll a couple hours later and see that it was actually close. I thought that you guys would say that Toji and Geto were actually somewhat close in strength, or that you guys would be split on who's stronger. But I checked the poll after 31,000 votes and yeah, 78% of you guys think that Toji is stronger than Volume 0 Geto. Now I also do believe that Toji is stronger. I don't think it's by a large amount, but I just do believe that with everything in Toji's arsenal, there's no way that even Geto being stronger in Volume 0 would be able to kill him. And I also want to say that the only reason I have Toji above Geto is because of the tools that he has. If you want to say that without the tools Toji would be weaker than Geto, then sure, you can have that. But when it comes to Toji's tools, we know that he has the inverted Spear of Heaven that deactivates any curse technique that it comes in contact with. We also know that he has the Split Soul Katana that bypasses durability and instantly cuts the soul of anybody he slashes. He also has other tools like the Chain of 1,000 Miles, but that tool isn't really that useful in comparison to the inverted Spear of Heaven and the Split Soul Katana. I will probably make a video on it one day, but with the Split Soul Katana specifically in the inverted Spear of Heaven, there's no way for Geto to stop Toji from just rushing forward and cutting through all of his curses and eventually just cutting Geto himself. Because like I said, the Split Soul Katana bypasses durability and just cuts the soul of whoever he slashes. So if Toji just runs forward with his insane speed and cuts Geto, there's nothing Geto would be able to do about it. And by the way, I'm not saying that Toji is just so fast, so much faster than Geto that he would be a blur in Geto's vision, but I'm just saying that the normal means that Geto has of fighting opponents and slowing them down would not work against Toji. Any curse he summons would just get cut through with the Split Soul Katana, and Geto himself, without the curses to use at his disposal because they're basically useless against Toji, Geto would just fall in the end, similarly to how he fell in Hidden Inventory. And if you're wondering what Toji would do against Maximum Uzumaki, he would just undoubtedly dodge it. Now, we didn't get to see exactly how fast Geto's Maximum Uzumaki was in Volume 0, because Yuta didn't try to dodge it, he just fought the blast with a blast of his own, and his blast beat Geto's. But if Geto's Maximum Uzumaki speed is anything similar to Kenjaku's, then yeah, Toji would just dodge it. Because we saw that when Kenjaku used Max Uzumaki on Miwa, Kusakabe was able to fly over, get in the way of the blast, and stop it before it hit Miwa. So the only way that Maximum Uzumaki would work against Toji is if somehow Geto's Maximum Uzumaki is tiers faster than Kenjaku's Maximum Uzumaki. And I just don't see any reason why that would be the case, because it's not even like Maximum Uzumaki is a speed technique anyway. It's supposed to be a blast that's built up and has extreme power. But that's enough talking about Toji against Geto. Excluding Geto, we know that Toji himself was able to completely blitz Dagon multiple times and exercise him inside Dagon's own domain expansion. We also know that Toji had the power to fully wipe out the Zenin clan if he wanted to. He could just go and kill the entire Zenin clan like Maki did at any point. And we also know this because one of the Zenin clan members named Ranta said that the only reason the Zenin clan existed was because of Master Toji's whim. And we also know that Toji would have been able to wipe out the clan because, well, Maki did it. Toji at one point was also probably the strongest guy on Earth. No joke, because back in Hidden Inventory, before Gojo had his awakening, Gojo and Geto were known as the strongest, and as we know, Toji at that point in time was able to beat both of them nearly to death. So for all of those reasons, I think Toji has earned his spot at number 3. At number 2, I have Kenjaku. Kenjaku has proved many of times why he is one of the strongest people in the entire verse. We see in chapter 244 that Mei, after using a bird strike against Sukuna, says, "Gojo, Kenjaku, Sukuna. Guys at that level always shoot my crows down." And we even see another translation on TCB that says, "Gojo, Kenjaku, and now Sukuna. I guess my power doesn't phase the complete monsters." So we see that there's this consistency of Kenjaku not being as strong as Gojo and Sukuna, but being up there in that upper echelon of complete monsters in the Jujutsu Kaisen verse. Remember all the things I said Geto had? I want you to take all of those abilities and things. Now add another curse technique on top of it, which is the gravity technique that we see Kenjaku use, plus the best barrier usage in Jujutsu Kaisen. We have multiple statements from Tengen just outright saying that Kenjaku is one of the few people who can match him in barrier techniques, and there's another statement from Tengen that says that Kenjaku is second to him when it comes to barrier usage. And we know that domains are barrier techniques, so it does make sense that Kenjaku would have one of the most powerful domains in Jujutsu Kaisen. Kenjaku's gravity technique is one of the most useful defenses we have seen in Jujutsu Kaisen. This technique even allowed Kenjaku to survive, guess this, a black hole. Kenjaku was able to survive a black hole through the use of his gravity technique. For a quick explanation on what Kenjaku's gravity technique does, for about 6 seconds, everything around him gets flown to the ground. It gets dragged and pushed to the ground by gravity. Remember Pain's ability from Naruto where he would push everything outwards? This is basically the same thing, but downwards. He uses the gravity to knock everything around him to the ground. Now there is a short interval where he can't use this technique, but in between the intervals of this gravity technique, he uses curse spirit manipulation. Because of his abilities, he was able to beat a special grade sorcerer, Yuki Tsukumo, while Yuki had the help of Tengen and Choso. Now I do want to point out one thing, and that is that if Yuki did not have the help of Tengen, she most likely would have just died at the beginning of the fight. And the reason I say this is because Kenjaku's domain expansion was able to mangle Yuki's entire arm after he was only able to get one hit off in his domain. Now for people who say, well, Yuki wasn't able to expand her domain expansion because Tengen told her not to, that's sort of like the whole point. Even if she had opened up her domain expansion, she would have undoubtedly lost the clash in the end. And I know that Kenjaku said it would have been more interesting if Yuki had expanded her domain, and that is true, because at least we would have been able to see some form of a domain clash, but undoubtedly, because of the statements we know about Kenjaku's barrier usage being the only person who can match Tengen, he would have just beat Yuki in a domain expansion in the end and just mangled her entire body with gravity sure hits. Now, a bit of a spoiler warning here, but we do know that Kenjaku got his head cut off by Yuta in some of the recent chapters, but people seem to forget that the entire point of Yuta coming and cutting his head off here is because he would be caught off guard coming out of the scenarios that Takaba had him stuck in. Now, I'm not saying that Yuta would have just lost if he fought Kenjaku straight up, but we do just have to account for the fact that the reason he was able to cut Kenjaku's head off so cleanly is because he was able to sneak up behind him before he could expect it. And before I move on to who I have at number 1, it is important to note that Kenjaku isn't dead. So even though Yuta cut off his head, Kenjaku is not dead right now, so anything can happen. And we'll just have to wait and see what happens with Kenjaku. Now let's move on to who number 1 is, Sukuna. And geez, where do I even start with Sukuna? He's the strongest thing, curse, sorcerer, whatever you want to say. He's the strongest sorcerer in history. And I just want to give big spoiler warnings. So if you don't want to know what happened between Gojo and Sukuna, then, here's your warning. Sukuna has the most powerful attack we have ever seen in Jujutsu Kaisen. A slash that divides the world, as Kashimo and Kusakabe call it. Now the reason they call it a slash that divides the world is because Sukuna can now target people without actually targeting them, so he can cut them. And I'll just shortly explain what that means. So we saw that the way Sukuna was able to defeat Gojo was by cutting him through his infinity. Now the reason Sukuna was able to do this is because he used Maharaga's adaptation to learn how to cut through infinity. And here is how Sukuna was able to do it. In a short, very easy to understand explanation, he didn't aim to cut Gojo. He aimed to cut the space itself in which Gojo was standing and thereby cut Gojo. So Sukuna didn't cut Gojo, he cut space and he cut the space where Gojo was standing. So by cutting the space where Gojo was standing, he basically cut Gojo. Hope that was pretty easy to understand. There's more words and a longer explanation in the manga, but that explanation I gave was like the sort of short, dumbed down explanation. Sukuna and Gojo were actually very close in power throughout their entire fight until the very end of the fight. I think that now with this new slash that Sukuna has, he's just even a level above Gojo. Because now that infinity wouldn't be there to stop Gojo, say even if Gojo rose from the dead right now and rematched Sukuna, you would just get cut in half again. We also know that Sukuna has insane durability, as throughout the fight with Gojo, he was hit by reds, blues. We saw he was hit by a purple towards the end of the fight, and he still just healed from it and kept fighting forward. The only way Gojo would stand a chance against Sukuna now is if he avoided that slash by all cost. We know that Sukuna also has probably the largest domain expansion in the series, as it has a 200-meter radius that can cover basically an entire city, and he can just cut down anything in the city. We saw him do this in Shibuya while fighting against Maharaga. After using his domain expansion, Sukuna's domain left an entire gaping hole in the city. Sukuna also has a flame arrow that we saw him defeat Maharaga with, and he also used this against Jogo, and this flame arrow was able to one-shot the both of them. It's said in the fanbook that the flame arrow burns opponents down to their bone marrow, so yeah, that's pretty terrifying. But with Sukuna's slashes, his flame arrow, just his outright speed, durability, domain expansion, and regeneration abilities, there's just no denying it that Sukuna is the strongest character in Jujutsu Kaisen right now. And for those reasons, he is number one on this list. And with that being said, I want to thank you so much for reaching the end of the video. And if you enjoyed, then I would really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as I do post on different topics that you guys give me and a few that I come up with on my own. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.